I've talked a lot on this channel about control and always trying to be in control of everything and everybody and wanting to control outcomes, control situations, control how things turn out. But there's one area of control that I've really been convicted of recently. And it's not something external. It's my words, my tongue. Because for a long time, I didn't have much of a filter. I would just say whatever came to mind. And friend, if this is you, then let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Lisa, and this is Second Peak, where we talk about things that happen in midlife and how to break free from bondage that's held us back to find freedom for the second half of life. And for a long time, like I said, I had no filter. I would just blurt out whatever came to mind. And in hindsight, maybe that's what kind of pushed me into that other ditch of not saying anything at all. But again, I wasn't loud or explosive, usually, but oftentimes I would speak sharply and critically and just with an edge. As a friend used to say, hateful vitriol, just spewing venom from my mouth, usually to the ones that I love the most. And for a long time, I would justify it by saying, I'm just being honest, or they're too sensitive, he's just being soft, a sissy. And I didn't think much about it. And in fact, I'd hardly even acknowledge that I hurt them. And I would go on as if I hadn't. But I can see now that my words were not neutral. They were doing something. They were either building up or tearing down. And most of the time, I really wasn't thinking about that at all. I was just reacting. It's like I actually believed that old lie of a nursery rhyme. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And I applied it to everyone, like a proverb of wisdom. And instead of teaching us to be stoic and resilient, it really, I think, just created a whole generation of sarcastic jerks, and I'm the chief of them. But I've been learning that our words don't just come out of nowhere. They come from what's inside. Out of the heart, the mouth speaks, right? Which means my words were revealing something, not about other people, but about me. And that's really uncomfortable, because it's easier to believe that the problem is out there and with other people and in circumstances or in what someone did or said. And the actual things that you can't control, but I have been trying to, yet the very thing that I can control, I don't. So when words are consistently critical or complaining or cutting, that's not just a communication issue, it's a heart issue. And I've seen now how that played out in my own home. With my husband, there were times that I would say something really sharp. And if he reacted, then I would just think, oh, he's just too sensitive, But now I can see that it wasn't him just being sensitive. It was me being hurtful. He was hurt. Because words have weight. And I was throwing stones, verbal stones. And they do land somewhere. And they stay there. And I think about my son. And he used to tell me that I was yelling, even when I wasn't even raising my voice. And I would get so frustrated because I'd think, I'm not yelling. But tone matters. The way something is said carries just as much weight as what is said. And he was responding to something real too. And then there's something else I've always had to that I'm having to face, and that's complaining. For a long time, I would come home from work and just sit down at the dinner table and just unload about my terrible day. and how mean my doctor boss was that day, and how incompetent my coworkers were, and how difficult the patients were, and every night. And it felt like it was justified. It felt like I was just venting. But I wasn't just venting. I was creating an atmosphere in our home. And I was shaping how I saw my life, and I was shaping others around me. Because words don't just express what we feel, they reinforce it. And they spread it. And negativity does something. It clouds how you see everything. And it's like a poison. And you start to expect the worst. You start to notice what's wrong first. And over time, that becomes the lens that you see through. And I can see now that it didn't just affect me. It affected all the people around me, at home and at work and everywhere. Because now I hear my son do the same thing, and I recognize it, and I know where it came from. And I have deep regret there, because even though I've changed, he doesn't live with that new version of me. He lived with the one who complained. And that's a hard truth. But it's also been a wake-up call, because it's shown me how powerful words really are. And something else that I've been realizing is that sometimes the very thing that we justify is the thing that's keeping us stuck. The tone, the sarcasm, the criticism, the complaining. Who wants to be around that? I mean, we tell ourselves, this is just how I am. Or they need to hear the truth. Or I'm just being real. But what if that's the thing that God's actually asking us to let go of? Because it's the thing that's holding us back. And that's been convicting. Because I can see how loosely I have held on to my words. Like they were my right, my outlet, my justification. And I didn't want to let that go. And there's another part that I've been thinking about, because a lot of this part stayed unspoken. And it was the way I spoke, the tone that I used, the patterns that I was repeating. And, I justified that. I minimized it. And I just moved past it by ignoring it. But there's something about naming it that changes things. Sister Monica Joan in Call the Midlife, there was an episode where she said, when a secret weighs heavy, we imagine it as our burden alone. But once it's spoken, it disappears. And I think that's true, because as long as something stays hidden, it keeps its weight. But when you bring it into the light, when you say it out loud, when you say it plainly, and you confess it, I've been sharp, I've been critical, I've been complaining, and you ask forgiveness for it, it loses its power, making it easier to turn from it. But because you're no longer carrying it in the dark. And I think that's part of the process has been for me. It's not just changing how I speak, but being willing to admit how I've spoken and letting that be the starting point. I mean, what if obedience looks like self-restraint? And I'm pretty good at self-restraint. Y'all know that in other areas of my life. So we know the capacity's there, right? But what if growth looks like pausing? What if freedom actually looks like filtering? And I've been learning what it means to do that. And not necessarily by saying less, but choosing more carefully. Because having a filter isn't about being fake. And it's just about being intentional. Because not everything that is said, or not everything that's true, needs to be said. And not everything that's said needs to be sharp. And so I've noticed something changing, that when your mind begins to shift, when you focus on God's word, when you focus on what is good, what is true, what is right, what is excellent, what is pure, then your words start to follow. And even what you hear from other people sounds different. Things that used to seem normal, hit the ears a little bit differently. You don't laugh at the same things. You may even wince just a little bit. And you find you don't jump to conclusions quite as fast after a comment is said because something in you has changed. And even still, this isn't about perfection. It's about direction. Moving from reactive to deliberate, and from carelessness to thoughtfulness, and from tearing down to building up. And I've lived on both sides of this. I've been afraid to speak, and I've spoken things that I shouldn't have. And now I'm just learning something different, and that is to speak with intention and to filter, but not to hide, and to align, to choose words that are true, but that are also gracious, because words are never neutral. They're always doing something. And I'm starting also to understand that this is one of the most important areas of change for me. Not controlling everything around me, but learning to control what comes out of me, because that has the power to change everything. And I want to say something else, because this isn't something that I've mastered. In fact, just this morning, as I was writing this, and I caught myself doing the exact same thing. I was sitting, having my quiet time, reading, thinking, praying, trying to have that space with God before the day got started. And I was a bit in a time crunch because I was getting ready for a flight. And my husband came downstairs, and he usually sleeps in about an hour or so longer than I do, just to give me that space. And before he even got to the bottom of the stairs, he just started yakking about nothing, talking to the dog, talking out loud, and just filling the space. And it was, from my perspective, noise and distraction, and I could just feel it immediately, that irritation, my ears turning red, my jaw clenching. And finally he comes around the corner and he says, "What time do you leave?" And I just looked at him and I said, 9, but not kindly. It came out sharp, probably sharper than even I just did it. And that just set the tone for the whole day. And just like that, I could just feel it in myself. The frustration, but also immediate regret, and even still resentment was starting to build. And that hardening, and the thought of, why doesn't he notice? And that's the moment. And that's where all of this lives. Not in the script, not in the reflection after the fact, but right there in that split second between what you feel and what you say. Because the truth is that he wasn't trying to be disruptive. He just wasn't aware. And I wasn't trying to be hurtful. He wasn't trying to be hurtful, but I wasn't careful. And he might lack observation, but I lack sensitivity. And if I'm honest, I just moved quickly into judgment and was selfish, and then went to irritation, and then that came out in my tone, and that's how fast it happens. And I can write all of this and still find myself right back in that moment, but the difference now is that I see it, and I don't just move on from it. I don't just ignore it. I notice it, and I don't want to stay there, because it's never about reacting poorly. It's about what I do next. Do I stay in that irritation? Do I justify it? Do I let it take shape? and ruin the rest of the day? Do I move on and pretend like it didn't happen? Or do I stop and let the Lord soften my heart and choose something different? Choose to apologize. And that's the work. And it's not perfection, but it's an awareness. And it's being willing to turn, even in the middle of it, as it's happening, you know. And that's how things change. So thanks for watching. And if this video helped you in any way, let me know in the comments. Please like and subscribe.